You've probably heard of the Tower of Babel, but do you know the real story behind humanity's most ambitious project? Today, we're breaking down the entire biblical account of the city of Babel, and I mean everything. We'll explore why all of humanity gathered in one place, what they were really trying to accomplish with their tower, and the shocking moment when God intervened to stop them. But here's where it gets really interesting. We'll also uncover the deeper meaning behind this ancient story and how it connects to prophecies about the end times. By the end of this video, you'll understand that Babel is more than just ancient history. It's a warning for today. But before we dive in, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Your support means we can continue producing these videos to help you learn more or unwind. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a community here, so you can connect with like-minded people from around the world in the comment section down below. So, without further ado, let's get started, shall we? Part 1, the aftermath of the flood. Noah's family steps onto dry ground. Their feet sink into earth that has never known human footprints. Behind them, the ark rests on Mount Ararat like a wooden monument to survival. Ahead stretches an endless horizon of rebirth. The silence feels profound. No bird songs yet, no rustling of leaves, just the gentle whisper of wind across an empty world. 8 souls stand at the threshold of everything. Noah, weathered by months of floating above destruction, looks across the transformed landscape. His wife clutches his arm. Their sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, gaze at valleys that stretch beyond sight. Each carries the weight of becoming a father to nations yet unborn. The first altar rises from gathered stones. Smoke drifts upward, carrying prayers and promises. God's covenant unfolds like a rainbow across clearing skies. Never again will waters cover the earth. This pledge settles into their hearts like seed in fertile soil. But promises carry responsibility. Noah's family must fill this empty world with life again. They must rebuild what was lost, replant what was washed away, and remember what was forgotten. The task feels overwhelming, yet they begin. Ham's son Cush is born into this new world. His cries echo across valleys that have never heard infant voices. More children follow. The family expands, spreads outward like ripples on still water. Each new birth adds another thread to the tapestry of humanity's second chance. Years pass, the family multiplies. Children who never knew the old world grow strong under open skies. They hear stories of the time before when evil filled the earth and God's patience reached its limit. These tales become warnings, whispers of what happens when humanity strays too far from its purpose. Cush fathers a son named Nimrod. This child arrives during a time of gradual recovery. Animals have begun to multiply. Plants push through soil that once lay beneath miles of water. The world shows signs of returning abundance. Into this healing landscape, Nimrod draws his first breath. The boy grows unlike his cousins. Where others tend flocks or plant crops, Nimrod hunts. His hands know the weight of spears and the tension of bowstrings. He tracks animals through forests that grow thicker each year. His eyes hold a brightness that others notice. His voice carries authority that makes men listen. At first, Nimrod's hunting feeds his family. Wild beasts still roam freely across the recovering earth. Lions, bears, and wolves multiply faster than livestock. Someone must protect the growing settlements. Nimrod becomes that protector. His reputation spreads among the scattered tribes of Noah's descendants. The young hunter's success brings followers. Men leave their fields to join his expeditions. They learn to track, to fight, to survive in wilderness that can turn dangerous without warning. Around campfires, they share stories of Nimrod's strength. Each tale grows in the telling. But Nimrod's ambition reaches beyond hunting. He watches the scattered families of his great-grandfather's lineage. They live in small groups, isolated from one another. They struggle alone against wild beasts and harsh weather. Their knowledge remains fractured, their strength divided. A vision takes shape in Nimrod's mind. Why should Noah's descendants live scattered and weak? Why should they fear the creatures they were meant to rule? The flood had scattered humanity once. Now, growing again, they scatter themselves through choice. Nimrod begins to gather more than hunting parties. He calls families together. He speaks of protection, of shared knowledge, of strength found in unity. His words carry the weight of proven success. Men who have seen him face down lions trust his judgment about facing the future. The scattered tribes of the plain listen to this mighty hunter. They see wisdom in his proposals. Wild animals pose less threat to larger settlements. Shared labor makes planting and harvesting easier. Combined knowledge helps them remember skills lost in the great washing of the world. Slowly, like streams converging into a river, the descendants of Noah begin to gather. They move toward the land of Shinar, where Nimrod's vision promises safety and prosperity. The empty world starts to fill with human voices again. But this time, those voices speak with growing confidence. The aftermath of the flood ends not with a whimper, but with a gathering storm of human ambition. Nimrod's name becomes synonymous with strength and leadership. His great-grandfather Noah had saved humanity from destruction. Now Nimrod promises to save it from weakness and division. The stage is set for something unprecedented. Humanity's second chance will not be squandered on timid survival. Under Nimrod's guidance, it will reach for something greater. The quiet world after the flood begins to stir with the sounds of hammers and voices, of plans and dreams that stretch toward the sky. Nimrod's ambition. The land of Shinar spreads before Nimrod like an unwritten scroll. Rich soil stretches to distant horizons. Rivers flow with clear water that reflects endless sky. This valley calls to something deep in his hunter's heart. Here, he decides, humanity will make its stand. Nimrod's followers arrive in groups, carrying their possessions and their trust. They find their leader already at work, marking boundaries, planning streets, envisioning a settlement unlike any the world has seen. His eyes hold the gleam of a man who sees beyond what exists to what could be. The first buildings rise from Shinar's fertile ground, not simple huts for shepherds, but structures that speak of permanence. Stone foundations rest on measurements carefully planned. Wooden beams fit together with precision that suggests this place will endure. Each building declares that its makers intend to stay. More than shelter, Nimrod creates something new. The scattered tribes have lived as wanderers since the flood. They follow flocks, chase game, move with the seasons. But Nimrod's vision anchors them to one place. Here he promises they will build something lasting. The settlement grows with purpose. Craftsmen arrive drawn by stories of Nimrod's grand plans. They bring skills preserved from the world before the flood. Metalworking, masonry, the art of making tools that last. Their knowledge combines with Nimrod's vision to create something unprecedented. Trade begins almost immediately. Caravans arrive, carrying goods from distant lands. They seek the products of Nimrod's growing city. Clay tablets record transactions that span hundreds of miles. The settlement becomes a magnet for commerce, drawing wealth from across the recovering world. Nimrod's reputation spreads faster than his city's borders. Stories travel with merchants and visitors. They tell of the mighty hunter who became a mighty ruler. They describe a place where safety and prosperity walk hand in hand. The tales grow more elaborate with each telling. But Nimrod's ambition reaches beyond trade and craftsmanship. He studies the scattered descendants of Noah. They live in small tribes, each following its own traditions. Their knowledge remains divided, their strength scattered. Such division, he believes, invites weakness. A greater vision takes shape in Nimrod's mind. Why should humanity remain fractured? The flood had been God's judgment on a world grown wicked, but God had also saved Noah's family. Surely, this meant humanity deserved a second chance. That chance, Nimrod believes, requires unity. He begins to speak of empire, not merely a city, but a gathering of all peoples under one banner, his banner. The idea excites his followers. They have seen what unified effort can accomplish. Their city rises faster than any settlement built by scattered tribes. Nimrod's speeches carry the weight of demonstrated success. He points to their growing prosperity, their increasing security, their expanding influence. All of this, he argues, comes from unity of purpose. Imagine what they could accomplish if all of Noah's descendants joined together. The concept appeals to deep human longings. Since the flood, people have lived with the fear of being scattered again. They remember the stories of the old world's destruction. They know how quickly security can vanish. Nimrod offers them permanent safety through permanent unity. Religious elements weave through Nimrod's growing ambition. He speaks of humanity's special place in creation. They alone were made in God's image. They alone received the command to rule over all living things. The flood had been a reset, not a diminishment. Now they must claim their rightful place. The city of Babel begins to take shape around these ideas. Its streets run straight and wide, designed for the movement of many people. Its buildings rise higher than necessary, declaring the ambition of their builders. Every stone laid carries the weight of Nimrod's vision. Skilled workers arrive from distant lands. They bring techniques for construction that exceed anything seen since the flood. The city grows not just in size, but in sophistication. Its walls stand higher, its buildings more elaborate, its infrastructure more complex. Nimrod's personal power grows alongside his city. He becomes more than a leader, he becomes a symbol. His word carries the weight of law. His vision shapes the daily lives of thousands. His ambition becomes the driving force of an entire civilization. The hunter who once tracked animals through wilderness now tracks something far greater. He pursues a dream of unified humanity, of empire that spans the known world, of power that rivals the forces that once brought the flood. His ambition has found its true prey. But ambition, like hunting, requires patience and planning. Nimrod knows that his vision cannot be rushed. He must build carefully, gather support slowly, and prepare for challenges that lie ahead. The greatest hunt of his life has begun. The gathering of nations news of Nimrod's city spreads like ripples across still water. Merchants carry tales of prosperity and safety. Travelers describe streets where different tribes trade in peace. The stories reach settlements scattered across the recovering world. In the mountains of Ararat, descendants of Japheth hear whispers of a place where knowledge flows freely. They pack their tools and their scrolls, leaving behind rocky valleys for promises of fertile ground. Their journey takes them through passes where their ancestors once feared to tread. From the southern lands come the children of Ham. They arrive with skills in working metals and shaping clay. Their faces show the wear of long travel, but their eyes hold the brightness of hope. They have heard that Nimrod's city welcomes all who come in peace. The eastern tribes send their finest craftsmen. These descendants of Shem carry techniques for building that their fathers learned from Noah himself. They remember the construction of the ark, the careful joining of wood and sealing of seams. Their knowledge becomes part of Babel's growing foundation. Languages blend in the city's streets. Each tribe brings its own words, its own ways of speaking, but somehow understanding flows between them. The common tongue that Noah's family spoke still lives in their voices. It serves as a bridge between different peoples. Markets spring up at every corner. Traders from the far north bring furs and amber. Southern merchants arrive with spices and precious stones. Eastern caravans carry silk and ivory. The city becomes a river into which all streams of commerce flow. Nimrod welcomes each group with ceremonies that honor their journey. He speaks of the courage required to leave familiar places. He promises that their sacrifice will be rewarded. In his city, he declares every skill will find its place, every person their purpose. The new arrivals bring more than goods and knowledge. They carry stories of the scattered world beyond Babel's borders. They describe vast lands where small tribes struggle alone against wild beasts and harsh weather. Their tales reinforce Nimrod's vision of unity's necessity. Housing expands to meet the growing population. New districts rise according to carefully planned designs. Each neighborhood reflects the character of its inhabitants while fitting into the city's greater pattern. Diversity strengthens rather than divides. Workshops multiply across the city. The metalworkers' quarter rings with the sound of hammers on iron. The potter's district fills with the smell of clay and fire. The weavers' streets bloom with colors that rival spring flowers. Each craft flourishes in proximity to others. Children born in Babel grow up speaking multiple languages. They learn skills from masters who traveled great distances to share their knowledge. These young ones represent something new in the post-flood world, a generation that sees unity as natural. Religious practices blend and merge. Each tribe brings its own memories of the divine. They share stories of the flood, of Noah's faithfulness, God's covenant with humanity. These traditions weave together into something richer than any single version. Nimrod's role evolves as his city grows. He becomes more than a ruler, he becomes a symbol of what unity can accomplish. His presence at ceremonies and festivals reminds everyone why they came. His speeches inspire continued dedication to the common cause. The city's influence extends beyond its borders. Surrounding settlements begin to adopt Babel's innovations. They copy its building techniques, its trade practices, its methods of governance. The city becomes a model for others to follow. Military strength grows alongside commercial prosperity. The various tribes contribute warriors to a common defense force. These soldiers train together, fight together, and live together. Their unity becomes a powerful deterrent to any who might threaten the city. Knowledge accumulates in Babel's libraries. Scribes record the wisdom of many peoples. They preserve techniques for farming, building, healing, and governing. This gathered knowledge becomes more valuable than any treasure. The city's success attracts attention from distant lands. Envoys arrive seeking trade agreements. Some come hoping to learn Babel's secrets. Others bring tribute, hoping to secure peaceful relations. All leave impressed by what they have seen. Nimrod's original vision of gathering Noah's descendants has succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. The city has become a beacon that draws people from across the known world. What began as a simple settlement has transformed into something unprecedented. But success brings its own challenges. The city grows faster than its infrastructure can support. Different cultures, despite their cooperation, maintain their distinctiveness. Managing such diversity requires wisdom and patience. The magnitude of what has been accomplished in Babel becomes clear to all who visit. This is not merely a city, but a new way of human existence. It represents the possibility of permanent unity, of shared purpose, of collective strength that no individual tribe could achieve alone. The birth of the tower. In the heart of Babel, where the broadest streets converge, stands an empty space. The ground here lies level and broad, marked only by surveyors' stakes and architects' plans. This cleared area holds the weight of Nimrod's greatest vision. The king calls together his finest builders. They gather in the early morning light, their faces showing the concentration of men about to undertake something unprecedented. Each carries the knowledge of their craft, refined through years of building Babel's growing splendor. Nimrod unfurls the plans that have consumed his thoughts for months. The drawings show a structure unlike anything built since the flood. Not a simple tower for defense or ceremony, but a massive construction that will rise toward the very heavens. The builders study the designs in reverent silence. The concept captures something deeper than mere architecture. This tower will stand as humanity's declaration of permanence. No longer will they live in fear of being scattered across the earth. No longer will they accept the limitations of their earthly existence. They will reach upward, toward the realm of the divine. Master craftsmen examine the technical details. The foundation must be enormous to support such height. The materials must be chosen with care to withstand wind and weather. The construction techniques must be perfected to ensure stability. Every element requires innovation. The tower's purpose extends beyond the practical. It will serve as a landmark visible from great distances, drawing travelers and traders to Babel. It will stand as a symbol of human achievement, proving that unity can accomplish anything. Most importantly, it will ensure that humanity never scatters again. Nimrod's explanation resonates with his audience. They understand the fear that drives this project. Their grandparents had lived through the flood. They know how quickly civilization can vanish. This tower will serve as an anchor, holding humanity together through whatever storms may come. The religious significance adds weight to the undertaking. This structure will literally reach toward heaven. Its top will pierce the clouds, bringing humanity closer to the divine realm. Some whisper that climbers might even glimpse God's dwelling place from its highest levels. Plans spread throughout the city like ripples in a pond. Every workshop, every guild, every family receives copies of the designs. The tower becomes everyone's project, everyone's dream. Children draw pictures of the finished structure. Adults discuss its construction with passionate intensity. Material requirements boggle the mind. Millions of bricks must be fired in kilns that work day and night. Rivers of mortar must be mixed to hold the massive structure together. Countless loads of stone must be quarried and transported. The logistics challenge every organizational skill. Labor forces organize around the tower's construction. Each tribe contributes workers according to its abilities. The strong carry materials, the skilled shape stones, the clever solve problems that arise daily. Everyone finds their place in the grand undertaking. The first ceremonial brick is laid with great fanfare. Nimrod himself places it in the foundation, declaring this the beginning of humanity's greatest achievement. Priests offer prayers for the project's success. Musicians play songs composed especially for the occasion. Work begins immediately after the ceremony. Teams of workers attack different aspects of the construction. Some dig the enormous foundation. Others establish kilns for firing bricks. Still others organize supply lines that will feed the project for years to come. The city's entire economy reorganizes around the tower. New markets spring up to supply the workers. Specialized tools are forged for unique construction challenges. Housing districts expand to accommodate the growing labor force. Babel transforms into a machine for building its great tower. Progress becomes visible within weeks. The foundation emerges from the earth, broader than any building ever constructed. Its size alone inspires awe. Workers and visitors alike stand at its edges, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what they're creating. Nimrod visits the construction site daily. He encourages the workers, solves problems with the foremen, and adjusts plans as needed. His presence reminds everyone that this tower represents more than stone and mortar. It embodies their collective hopes and dreams. The project attracts attention from across the known world. Delegations arrive to witness the construction. Some come to learn new techniques. Others bring gifts to support the work. A few express concern about the tower's ambitious height. As the first level rises from the foundation, the tower's reality becomes undeniable. This is not merely a grand building, but a statement of human determination. It declares that Noah's descendants will not be scattered again. They will stand together, reaching toward heaven itself. Building Babel. Dawn breaks over Babel with the sound of 10,000 hammers. The tower construction has transformed the city into a vast workshop. Smoke rises from brick kilns that never cool. The air fills with the calls of workers, the creak of rope and pulley, the endless rhythm of progress. Work camps spread outward from the tower's base like the spokes of a wheel. Each camp houses specialists in different aspects of construction. The brick makers rise before sunrise to tend their kilns. The stone cutters work through the heat of midday. The mortar mixers labor into the evening hours. Supply lines stretch across the known world. Caravans arrive daily carrying materials from distant lands. Cedar wood comes from the northern forests. Precious stones travel from eastern mountains. Metals flow from southern mines. The tower consumes the wealth of nations. The construction site buzzes with organized chaos. Teams of workers move with practiced efficiency. Ramps spiral upward around the tower's growing walls. Pulleys lift massive stones to heights that would have seemed impossible just years before. Every movement serves the greater purpose. Nimrod's engineers solve problems that have never existed before. How do you lift blocks weighing tons to unprecedented heights? How do you maintain stability as the structure reaches toward the clouds? How do you coordinate the labor of thousands without confusion? Their solutions become legends in themselves. Great wheels turned by teams of oxen raise materials up the tower's sides. Ingenious systems of counterweights reduce the effort needed to move massive stones. Signals flags communicate between different levels of the construction. The tower's design evolves as it rises. Each level presents new challenges that require innovation. The builders learn as they build, adapting their techniques to meet the structure's growing demands. Their knowledge expands along with their creation. Workers develop their own culture around the construction. They sing songs that match the rhythm of their labor. They tell stories of the tower's future glory. They compete in friendly contests to see who can lay the most bricks in a day. Their shared purpose binds them together. The city's economy revolves completely around the tower. Merchants calculate their profits in terms of construction needs. Farmers grow crops to feed the workers. Craftsmen create tools designed specifically for the project. Every aspect of life serves the great undertaking. Families relocate to be closer to the construction. Children grow up playing in the shadow of the rising tower. They learn to count by watching bricks being laid. They dream of the day when they too will contribute to the great work. The tower becomes their normal world. Religious observances blend with construction schedules. Workers pause for prayers at regular intervals. Priests move through the work camps, offering blessings and encouragement. The tower's spiritual significance infuses every aspect of the labor. The structure's height begins to amaze even its builders. From the upper levels, the surrounding countryside spreads out like a detailed map. Rivers look like silver threads. Forests appear as green carpets. The world seems smaller, more manageable from such heights. Weather presents constant challenges. Rain turns the worksite into a maze of mud. Wind at higher levels threatens to topple workers and materials. Lightning strikes raise fears about divine displeasure. Yet the work continues through every season. Quality control becomes increasingly important as the tower rises. Weak bricks could cause catastrophic failure. Poorly mixed mortar might allow sections to crumble. Inspectors check every element before it becomes part of the structure. Their vigilance protects months of previous work. The tower's fame spreads to lands beyond any previous contact. Explorers arrive from distant continents, drawn by stories of humanity's greatest achievement. They bring with them new techniques and materials. The tower becomes a magnet for knowledge from across the world. Night shifts allow work to continue around the clock. Torches illuminate the construction site, creating a scene of almost magical intensity. The tower grows even while the city sleeps. Workers take pride in contributing to progress that never stops. Nimrod's visits to the construction site become events in themselves. Workers gather to hear his encouragement. His presence reminds them that they're not just building a tower, but creating a monument to human unity. Their individual labor serves a purpose greater than themselves. The tower's base, now complete, covers an area larger than many cities. Its walls rise smooth and straight, defying the Earth's pull. Each level that takes shape above proves that humanity can achieve anything through cooperation and determination. Observers begin to speak of the tower in terms that approach worship. They describe it as humanity's greatest achievement, proof of their special place in creation. Some whisper that when complete, it will allow direct communication with the divine realm. The machinery of unity. The tower's construction reshapes more than Babel's skyline. It transforms the very nature of human organization. What began as a building project becomes a system of governance unlike anything the world has seen since the flood. Nimrod's authority extends through every level of the tower's hierarchy. Foremen report to supervisors who answer to administrators who serve the king himself. This chain of command ensures that his vision guides every brick laid, every decision made. Power flows downward like water through carefully constructed channels. Administrative districts spring up around the tower's base. Scribes work in chambers lined with clay tablets recording every detail of the construction. They track materials, monitor progress, and maintain records of worker assignments. Their documentation creates a vast library of human organization. The supply system requires governance of its own. Trade officials negotiate with distant lands for materials. Transportation coordinators manage the movement of goods across hundreds of miles. Quality inspectors ensure that only the finest materials reach the tower. Each function demands skilled oversight. Workers organize into guilds that serve specific purposes. The brick makers develop their own customs and traditions. The stone cutters create apprenticeship programs to pass on their knowledge. The mortar mixers perfect techniques that serve the tower's unique demands. Specialization breeds excellence. Legal systems emerge to handle disputes that arise from such massive undertakings. Judges trained in Nimrod's vision of unity settle conflicts between workers from different tribes. They create precedents that will guide future decisions. Justice becomes another tool for maintaining harmony. The tower's religious significance requires its own administrative structure. Priests organize ceremonies that sanctify the construction. They offer prayers for the workers' safety and the project's success. Their rituals bind the spiritual and practical aspects of the work together. Communication networks span the growing empire. Messengers carry news between distant work sites. Signal towers relay important information across vast distances. The tower becomes the center of a web that connects all parts of Nimrod's domain. Cultural fusion accelerates under the pressure of shared labor. Workers from different tribes learn each other's techniques. They share stories during rest periods. They intermarry, creating families that bridge traditional divisions. The tower becomes a crucible for human unity. Education systems develop to train new workers. Master craftsmen teach apprentices the skills needed for construction. Engineers share knowledge of mathematics and physics. The tower's demands create schools that preserve and expand human knowledge. The city's infrastructure expands to support the growing population. New aqueducts bring water from distant sources. Sewage systems handle waste from the massive work camps. Roads improve to accommodate the constant traffic of supply caravans. Urban planning becomes a necessity. Military organization adapts to protect the great work. Guards patrol the construction site to prevent sabotage. Scouts watch for threats from jealous neighbors. The army that once protected Babel now serves primarily to shield the tower from any interference. Economic systems evolve to handle the project's massive costs. New forms of currency emerge to facilitate trade. Banking systems develop to manage the flow of resources. The tower's expense creates financial innovations that will outlast the construction itself. The tower's influence spreads to settlements throughout the region. Other cities adopt Babel's administrative methods. They copy its building techniques and governance structures. The tower becomes a model for human organization across the known world. Nimrod's personal role transforms as the system grows. He becomes less a hands-on ruler and more a symbol of the greater purpose. His presence at ceremonies and celebrations reminds everyone why they work. His vision continues to guide the project even when he's not physically present. Labor relations require careful management. Workers must be fed, housed, and cared for. Their families need protection and support. Medical care becomes essential for maintaining the workforce. Social services expand to meet human needs. The tower's construction creates new social classes. Skilled supervisors gain status and authority. Successful merchants accumulate wealth and influence. The project generates inequality even as it promotes unity. Social dynamics become increasingly complex. Records show the staggering scale of the undertaking. Millions of bricks fired and laid. Thousands of workers employed daily. Countless loads of materials transported and used. The numbers themselves tell the story of human determination and organization. The machinery of unity hums with efficiency. Every part serves the whole. Every worker contributes to the greater purpose. The tower rises not just because of individual effort, but because of collective organization. Humanity has learned to work together on a scale never before attempted. The fear of scattering Nimrod stands before the great assembly as twilight paints the tower's growing walls. His voice carries across the gathered multitude, strong and clear. The workers pause in their evening preparations to hear their king speak of the purpose that drives them all. "We shall not be scattered," he declares, his words echoing off the tower's stone faces. Never again will humanity wander the earth in small, frightened groups. Here in this place, we make our stand against the forces that would divide us. The crowd responds with murmurs of agreement. They understand the fear that underlies their great work. Their grandparents had lived through the flood. They know how quickly the world can change, how easily security can vanish. The tower represents their answer to uncertainty. Nimrod speaks of the old stories, the tales passed down from Noah's family. Before the flood, humanity had spread across the earth in small tribes. They had grown weak through division. When judgment came, they could not stand together. Their scattered condition had made them vulnerable. But we are wiser now, the king continues. We have learned the lesson of unity. Here, in this tower, we build more than stone and mortar. We build a guarantee that humanity will never again face destruction alone. The fear of scattering runs deeper than mere practical concerns. It touches something fundamental in human nature. People need to belong, to be part of something greater than themselves. The tower offers that belonging on a scale never before imagined. Workers share stories during their rest periods. They tell of distant relatives who still live in scattered settlements. These family members face wild beasts alone, struggle with harsh weather without support, and preserve only fragments of the knowledge their ancestors possessed. Such isolation seems tragic to those who experience Babel's unity. The tower's height becomes a symbol of permanence. Each level that rises declares humanity's intention to stay together. The structure will be visible from vast distances. serving as a beacon that calls the scattered home. No one who sees it can doubt the builder's commitment to unity. Nimrod's speeches increasingly focus on the theme of making a name for themselves. He reminds the workers that they are creating something that will be remembered for all time. Their children and grandchildren will point to the tower with pride. Future generations will know that their ancestors achieved something magnificent. The fear of anonymity drives the workers as much as the fear of scattering. They remember how quickly the flood had erased the old world. Cities, cultures, and civilizations had vanished as if they had never existed. The tower will prevent such forgetting. Religious leaders add their voices to the chorus of unity. They interpret the tower's construction as fulfilling humanity's divine mandate. God had commanded people to fill the earth and subdue it. The tower represents the ultimate expression of that command, the highest achievement of human potential. The project's scale continues to amaze everyone involved. Materials arrive from lands so distant that few workers have ever seen them. The tower's foundation covers more ground than entire cities. Its height already exceeds any structure built since the flood. Such magnitude proves that unity can accomplish anything. Visitors from distant lands reinforce the fears that drive the construction. They bring news of struggles in scattered settlements. Disease spreads unchecked through small communities. Wild animals threaten isolated families. Knowledge disappears when old craftsmen die without trained successors. Their reports validate Babel's approach. The tower's influence extends beyond its physical presence. Other settlements begin to adopt Babel's methods of organization. They copy its building techniques and social structures. The tower becomes a model that transforms the entire region, proving that unity attracts and inspires others. Nimrod's personal charisma binds the project together. His presence at ceremonies and festivals reminds everyone of their shared purpose. His vision transforms individual labor into collective achievement. Without him, the tower would be merely a construction project. With him, it becomes a crusade. The fear of scattering creates urgency that drives the work forward. Every day of delay means another day of vulnerability. Every completed level brings humanity closer to permanent security. The workers understand that they race against time and the forces of dissolution. Children growing up in Babel's shadow know no other way of life. They cannot imagine living in scattered tribes. The tower represents their normal world, their expected future. They will inherit a civilization that their parents' generation could only dream of creating. The tower's symbolic power grows with its physical height. It stands as humanity's declaration of independence from the forces that would scatter them. It represents their refusal to accept the limitations of their earthly existence. It embodies their determination to reach towards something greater than themselves. A tower of clay and fire. The tower rises from Babel's heart like a mountain born of human will. Its walls gleam in the morning sun, built from millions of bricks fired in kilns that never cool. The structure's surface shows the marks of countless hands, each brick placed with care and devotion. Clay forms the tower's foundation, literally and spiritually. The builders dig this clay from the earth of Shinar, transforming mud into something magnificent. They mix it with water drawn from the same rivers that once carried the flood. What was once destruction becomes creation. The brick-making process has evolved into an art form. Workers shape each brick by hand, pressing the clay into molds that ensure uniformity. They dry the bricks in the sun until they harden. Finally, they fire them in kilns heated by flames that never die. Clay becomes as strong as stone through the marriage of earth and fire. Mortar holds the massive structure together. The builders mix tar with clay, creating a bond stronger than either material alone. This bitumen comes from pits in the earth, another gift from the land of Shinar. The tower literally grows from the soil on which it stands. The construction site glows with fire day and night. Kilns burn continuously, their flames visible from great distances. Torches illuminate the work that continues after sunset. Fire has become humanity's partner in this great undertaking, transforming raw materials into building blocks for their dreams. Workers develop deep reverence for their materials. They speak of clay as the substance from which humanity itself was formed. They see fire as the divine spark that gives life to their creation. The tower becomes a collaboration between human ambition and elemental forces. The structure's texture tells the story of its construction. Each level shows slightly different techniques as the builders learned and improved. The lowest courses display the careful work of craftsmen finding their rhythm. Higher levels reveal the confidence of masters who have perfected their art. Scaffolding surrounds the tower like a wooden forest. These support structures allow workers to reach incredible heights safely. The scaffolding itself requires engineering skills that push the boundaries of known techniques. It rises alongside the tower, reaching toward the same impossible goal. The tower's interior reveals spaces designed for specific purposes. Some chambers will house the priests who will maintain the structure's spiritual significance. Others will store the records that document its construction. The largest spaces will accommodate the ceremonies that celebrate humanity's achievement. Decorative elements begin to appear as the tower grows. Skilled artisans carve patterns into the brick faces. They create designs that speak of the project's religious meaning. These decorations transform the tower from mere construction into a work of art. The tower's height creates its own weather patterns. Clouds form around its upper levels. Rain falls differently at such elevation. Wind behaves in ways that challenge the workers' understanding. The structure enters realms where earth meets sky. Workers at the highest levels report strange experiences. They describe feelings of closeness to the divine realm. Some claim to hear voices in the wind. Others speak of visions that come to them during their labor. The tower's height seems to thin the boundary between earth and heaven. The structure's shadow moves across Babel like a sundial. Workers use its position to mark the hours of their labor. The shadow's length measures the tower's growth, providing daily proof of their progress. The tower becomes a timekeeper for the entire city. Building techniques evolve to meet the tower's unique demands. New methods for mixing mortar ensure consistency across vast quantities. Improved brick-making processes create stronger materials. The tower's construction advances human knowledge of building and engineering. The tower's base, now complete, inspires awe in every visitor. Its walls rise smooth and straight, defying the earth's pull. The structure's perfection proves that human hands can create works of divine beauty. Its foundation seems strong enough to support the weight of heaven itself. Materials testing becomes crucial as the tower grows. Engineers check each batch of bricks for strength and durability. They test mortar for proper consistency. They inspect every element before it becomes part of the structure. The tower's integrity depends on such careful attention. The tower's construction generates its own mythology. Workers tell stories of the day when the top will touch the clouds. They imagine conversations with angels who will visit the completed structure. Their dreams grow as tall as their creation. Quality becomes a sacred duty. Each worker knows that their contribution will last for generations. They take pride in laying bricks that future children will see. Their individual efforts merge into something greater than any of them could achieve alone. The tower's acoustics create unexpected effects. Sounds echo strangely within its walls. Workers learn to use these echoes to communicate across great distances. The structure develops its own voice, speaking through the sounds of construction and the whispers of wind. Fire remains central to every aspect of the work. The kilns that create bricks burn with flames that seem alive. Workers tend these fires with religious devotion. They understand that fire transforms their raw materials into something worthy of their grand vision. The tower of clay and fire rises as humanity's boldest statement. It declares that earth and flame, guided by human will, can reach toward heaven itself. Each brick placed brings them closer to their goal. Each day of work proves that unity can accomplish the impossible. The warning signs. Strange sounds begin to echo through Babel's streets at night. Dogs howl without apparent cause. Horses grow restless in their stables. The very air seems to vibrate with tension that no one can name or explain. Cracks appear in buildings that had stood solid for years. These fissures follow no pattern that the architects understand. They snake through walls with seeming randomness. Workers repair them each morning, only to find new ones by evening. Birds change their flight patterns around the tower. Flocks that once soared straight now circle its base in agitated spirals. Some species abandon the area entirely. Others gather in unusual numbers, their calls creating a constant background chorus of unease. Master builders notice problems with their materials. Bricks that should last forever crumble unexpectedly. Mortar that has held for months suddenly fails. Tools break without explanation. The very elements seem to resist the tower's continued growth. Workers report disturbing dreams that visit them with increasing frequency. They see the tower surrounded by darkness. They dream of voices speaking in languages they cannot understand. Some wake with the taste of fear in their mouths and trembling in their hands. Lightning strikes the tower's upper levels with unusual frequency. These bolts come from clear skies, arriving without warning or apparent cause. The strikes leave scorch marks that fade quickly but return in the same places. The pattern suggests intention rather than chance. Animals flee the construction site in growing numbers. Livestock become difficult to manage. Wild creatures that once ignored human activity now give the tower a wide berth. The exodus creates an unnatural silence around the base. Elderly workers begin to speak of omens. They remember stories their grandparents told of signs that preceded the Great Flood. They see similarities in the current disturbances. Their whispered warnings spread through the work camps like shadows. A few brave voices question whether the tower has grown tall enough. They suggest that humanity has proven its point, demonstrated its unity. Perhaps the time has come to declare victory and focus on other achievements. Their words meet with strong resistance from project leaders. Priests from the surrounding regions arrive with messages of concern. They bring word from settlements that have experienced unusual phenomena. Earthquakes shake lands that had been stable. Rivers change their courses without explanation. The natural world seems to be responding to Babel's ambition. Nimrod's response to these concerns remains firm and unwavering. He attributes the disturbances to jealousy from neighboring peoples. He suggests that enemies spread false rumors to undermine the project. His confidence reassures most workers, but doubts begin to take root. The tower's height creates new challenges that feel different from mere engineering problems. Workers at the upper levels report difficulty breathing. Some experience dizziness that has nothing to do with the elevation. A few claim that their thoughts become confused when they climb too high. Scribes document increasingly frequent accidents. Tools fall from heights that should not affect their users. Workers stumble without apparent cause. Communication between different levels becomes more difficult. The tower seems to resist its own completion. Mysterious illnesses affect workers without warning. These sicknesses follow no known patterns. They strike the healthy as often as the weak. Healers find their usual remedies ineffective. The ailments disappear as suddenly as they arrive, leaving no trace except memory. Weather patterns around the tower grow increasingly erratic. Winds blow from directions that make no sense. Rain falls in strange patterns that seem to avoid the construction site. Clouds gather around the tower's peak in formations that defy natural law. Some workers begin to speak of voices that call to them during their labor. These voices seem to come from the tower itself. They speak words of warning in languages the workers do not recognize. The messages remain unclear, but that their tone suggests urgent concern. Night watches report lights that appear around the tower without source. These glows dance through the scaffolding like living creatures. They vanish when approached, but return when the watchers retreat. Their presence creates unease among the guards. The tower's acoustics change in ways that disturb the workers. Sounds that once echoed normally now distort into shapes that seem almost like words. Hammers striking stone create rhythms that remind listeners of heartbeats. The structure develops its own language of warning. Despite these signs, the construction continues. Nimrod's determination drives the work forward. He interprets every disturbance as proof that the tower threatens forces that prefer humanity divided and weak. His vision remains clear even as shadows gather around his achievement. The warning signs multiply like ripples on disturbed water. Each new phenomenon reinforces the others. Together, they create a pattern that suggests approaching change. The question becomes whether humanity will recognize the warnings before it is too late. The divine response high, above the clouds, beyond the reach of human sight, the eternal councils convene. The Tower of Babel has grown tall enough to attract attention from realms where time moves differently and perspective spans eternity. The Lord descends to examine what humanity has built. This visitation carries weight beyond mortal understanding. Eyes that shape the stars now focus on brick and mortar raised by human hands. The tower stands before divine scrutiny like a child's drawing presented to a master artist. Heaven's perspective reveals truths hidden from earthly view. The tower represents more than ambitious construction. It embodies humanity's attempt to secure itself against divine will. The people seek safety through their own strength rather than trust in heavenly protection. The divine assessment considers not just the tower's height, but the hearts of its builders. Their motives flow from fear rather than faith. They build not to honor their creator, but to establish their own security. Their unity serves self-preservation rather than righteous purpose. Conversations echo through celestial courts about humanity's direction. The tower represents a turning point in human development. Left unchecked, this path leads away from dependence on divine grace toward reliance on collective human power. The tower's symbolic meaning becomes clear from heaven's vantage point. It stands as humanity's declaration of independence from divine authority. Its builders to seek to eliminate their need for God's protection through their own achievements. Such pride echoes the rebellion that brought the flood. Divine wisdom considers appropriate responses. Destroying the tower would repeat the flood's pattern of judgment, but allowing its completion would validate humanity's rejection of divine authority. The solution must address the heart of the problem rather than merely its symptoms. The confusion of languages emerges as the perfect response. This intervention will scatter humanity without destroying them. It will humble their pride without eliminating their potential. Most importantly, it will preserve their freedom to choose their path while limiting their ability to choose wrongly. The decision reflects divine love as much as divine justice. Scattering humanity will protect them from the consequences of unified rebellion. Confusing their language will force them to develop in smaller groups where individual conscience can function more effectively. Preparation for intervention requires careful timing. The tower must reach sufficient height to demonstrate humanity's capabilities. The people must invest enough effort to understand the magnitude of their loss. The lesson must be clear without being cruel. Angels receive their instructions with perfect understanding. They will implement the language confusion at the moment of maximum effect. The intervention will be swift, comprehensive, and undeniable. Humanity will understand that their limitation comes from divine action. The divine presence moves closer to earth as the moment approaches. Heaven's attention focuses on Babel with intensity that makes the very air tremble. Workers sense something approaching without understanding what their feelings mean. Divine eyes survey the tower's construction with perfect knowledge. Every brick laid in pride is noted. Every word spoken in defiance is heard. Every thought directed towards self-sufficiency rather than divine dependence is understood. The tower's true height becomes apparent from heaven's perspective. Measured against divine standards, it remains a tiny achievement. Its builders congratulate themselves on reaching toward the clouds while remaining bound to earth by their limitations. The irony of the situation unfolds clearly. Humanity builds the tower to avoid being scattered, but their pride in the achievement necessitates exactly that scattering. Their attempt to secure unity through their own efforts will result in division beyond anything they previously experienced. Divine patience reaches its appropriate limit. The tower has served its purpose as a demonstration of human pride. Further construction would only increase the eventual consequences. The time for intervention has arrived. The moment of response draws near like dawn approaching darkness. Workers continue their labor without understanding that they work toward their own limitation. The tower rises toward a ceiling it cannot perceive. Heaven's decision stands firm and final. The confusion of languages will begin at the next sunrise. Humanity's second great lesson is about to unfold. Their unity will shatter like pottery dropped from great height. The divine response reflects perfect justice tempered by perfect mercy. Humanity will lose their tower but keep their lives. They will forfeit their unity but retain their potential. The intervention will teach without destroying, limit without eliminating hope. Preparation reaches completion as night settles over Babel. Tomorrow will bring changes that no human mind can anticipate. The tower stands ready for its final day of unified construction. After tomorrow, everything changes forever. The shattering of speech. Dawn breaks over Babel like any other morning. Workers climb the endless scaffolding, their voices calling out in the familiar tongue that has bound them together for generations. The foreman shouts his orders. The rope pullers respond with their usual rhythm. Stone carriers grunt their acknowledgments as they haul massive blocks toward the heavens. But something shifts in the air. A worker high on the tower's eastern face calls down to his partner. The words that leave his mouth are the same he has spoken every morning for 3 years. Yet the sounds that reach his partner's ears carry no meaning. The syllables fall like broken pottery, scattered and strange. The partner stares upward, confusion spreading across his weathered face. He calls back, asking for clarity. His own words emerge twisted, foreign to his own ears. The foreman approaches, barking commands that neither man can understand. The rope pullers pause, their coordinated movements faltering as orders become meaningless noise. Across the construction site, similar scenes unfold. A master builder gestures frantically at his apprentices, his instructions dissolving into incomprehensible sounds. The apprentices look at each other, then at their master, their faces showing the first flickers of panic. The mortar mixers stop their work, unable to understand the measurements being called out. The stone cutters pause their chisels, uncertain of the specifications being shouted from below. The confusion spreads like ripples in a pond. Workers who had labored side by side for years now stare at each other as strangers. The familiar morning chatter dissolves into a cacophony of alien tongues. Some workers drop their tools, backing away from companions who suddenly speak in unknown languages. Others press forward, speaking louder, as if volume might restore meaning to their words. The tower's great pulley system, once a marvel of coordinated effort, begins to falter. Commands given at the base reach the upper levels as unintelligible noise. Ropes slacken at the wrong moments. Stone blocks swing dangerously as signals are misunderstood. The rhythm that had driven the tower's construction for decades breaks apart in a matter of hours. A massive stone block, lifted by a team that can no longer coordinate their movements, crashes to the ground. The sound echoes across the construction site, but the warnings shouted by witnesses reach no understanding ears. Workers scatter in all directions, their shouts of alarm adding to the growing chaos. The priests, who had blessed the morning's work with ancient prayers, find their sacred words transformed into meaningless sounds. Their congregations stare blankly, no longer moved by rituals that had once stirred their souls. The prayers that had unified the workers' purpose now divide them, each group hearing only foreign incantations. As the sun climbs higher, the magnitude of the transformation becomes clear. The great city of Babel, built on the foundation of shared language and common purpose, begins to fracture along linguistic lines. Workers who can still understand each other cluster together, eyeing other groups with suspicion and fear. The universal tongue that had made their grand project possible has shattered into countless fragments. The tower itself, that great monument to human unity, stands silent above the chaos. Its incomplete peak reaches toward heaven. But the voices that had once risen in unison from its base now speak in 100 different tongues. The very stones seem to mock the confusion below, solid and unchanging, while the human community that built them dissolves into linguistic chaos. By midday, the construction site has emptied. The great work that had consumed the lives and dreams of countless thousands comes to a halt. The tower stands abandoned, its scaffolding empty, its purpose suddenly as foreign as the languages that now divide its builders. The shattering of speech has become the shattering of everything they had built together. Panic in Babel. The sun reaches its peak as chaos consumes the greatest construction site the world has ever known. The morning's confusion has deepened into something far more dangerous. Workers who began the day as brothers now eye each other with growing suspicion. The shared language that had bound them together has become a barrier that divides them completely. A foreman from the northern crews approaches a group of southern workers, gesturing desperately at a pile of stones that needs moving. His words pour out in urgent streams, but the sounds mean nothing to those who hear them. The southern workers back away, their hands moving to the tools at their belts. Fear replaces confusion as they wonder if this strange-tongued man threatens them. The misunderstanding spreads like wildfire. A water carrier trying to explain that the wells are running low finds his warnings dismissed as hostile chatter. The rope teams, once perfectly coordinated, now pull against each other as their signals become meaningless noise. A massive beam swings wildly, its handlers unable to communicate their intentions to those below. The tower's great stairway, carved into its eastern face, becomes a river of panicked humanity. Workers flee downward, their voices raised in a dozen different tongues. The narrow passage, designed for orderly movement, becomes a bottleneck of fear. Those climbing up meet those rushing down, and neither group can explain their urgency to the other. A young apprentice, separated from his master in the confusion, wanders through the site, calling out in words that no one understands. His cries grow more desperate as the hours pass. The faces that once smiled at him now regard him with blank incomprehension. The community that had raised him has become a foreign land. The accident that everyone had feared finally occurs. A support rope, weakened by days of miscommunication, snaps under the weight of a massive stone. The block tumbles from the tower's height, its fall announced by shouts that carry no meaning to those below. 3 workers die in the crushing impact, their bodies broken by the very stones they had lifted toward heaven. The crowd that gathers around the fallen cannot even mourn together. Their grief pours out in languages that others cannot understand. The prayers spoken over the dead fall on uncomprehending ears. The accident that might have united them in shared sorrow instead deepens their division. Nimrod himself appears at the construction site, his presence marked by the golden ornaments that proclaim his authority. He shouts commands that once would have sent thousands of workers into coordinated action, but his voice, though still powerful, carries no meaning to most of those who hear it. The king's words become mere noise, his authority undermined by the very confusion that has engulfed his greatest project. The royal guard, drawn from tribes across the empire, find themselves unable to communicate with each other. Orders passed down the chain of command dissolve into incomprehensible babble. The disciplined formations that had once enforced Nimrod's will begin to fracture along linguistic lines. Soldiers who had served together for years now regard each other with suspicion. As evening approaches, the great construction site empties completely. The workers, unable to coordinate their efforts or understand their purpose, abandon their tools where they lie. The massive stones, cut and shaped for the tower's next level, remain scattered across the ground. The mortar, mixed that morning with such care, hardens unused in its containers. The fire that had burned continuously at the tower's base, symbol of humanity's eternal ambition, flickers and dies. No one remains who understands the sacred words needed to tend it. The flame that had lit the workers' way for countless nights goes out, leaving the tower in darkness. The great dining halls where workers had gathered each evening to share food and stories stand silent and empty. The benches that had seated thousands now accommodate only shadows. The songs that had once united voices from across the known world will never be sung again in harmony. By dawn, the tower stands alone. Its peak reaches toward heaven, but its base is surrounded only by abandoned tools and empty scaffolding. The greatest construction project in human history has ground to a halt, not through enemy action or natural disaster, but through the simple inability of people to understand each other's words. The panic that began with confusion has ended in abandonment. The community that had worked together for generations has dissolved in a single day. The tower that was meant to prevent their scattering has become the very cause of their division, the collapse of unity. The great city of Babel, once a beacon of human cooperation, begins its slow descent into chaos. The linguistic confusion that started at the tower spreads through the streets like a plague. Merchants who had traded with customers for decades now find themselves unable to negotiate the simplest transactions. The marketplaces, once filled with the cheerful noise of commerce, become stages for frustrated gestures and mounting tension. The administrative buildings, where scribes had recorded laws and decrees in the universal tongue, fall silent. The clerks stare at documents they can no longer read. The judges find themselves unable to understand the cases brought before them. The legal system that had governed the growing empire collapses as the words that define justice become meaningless sounds. Families begin to fracture along linguistic lines. Children who had learned their trades from foreign masters now find themselves cut off from their teachers. The apprentice system, which had spread knowledge and skills throughout the city, crumbles as instruction becomes impossible. The great workshops where craftsmen from different lands had shared their techniques empty as communication fails. The priests who had once led unified worship in the great temple find their congregations dividing into separate groups. Each cluster speaks in its own tongue, creating separate prayers and separate rituals. The universal faith that had bound the city together splinters into countless variations. The gods themselves seem to speak in different voices to different peoples. Within days, the first groups begin to pack their belongings. The northern tribes who had come to Babel seeking prosperity find themselves isolated by their strange speech. They gather their families and their possessions, preparing to return to the lands they had left behind. The promise of unity that had drawn them to the great city has become a curse of division. The southern clans who had built their wealth through trade connections watch their commercial networks collapse. The languages that had once facilitated commerce across vast distances now create barriers that cannot be crossed. The merchants who had grown rich in Babel's markets find their skills useless in a world where words carry no meaning beyond their own small groups. The Eastern peoples, who had contributed their knowledge of metals and stones to the tower's construction, see their expertise dismissed as incomprehensible chatter. The techniques they had developed over generations cannot be passed on to those who speak different tongues. The wisdom that had made the great construction possible dies with the death of shared language. Nimrod watches his empire crumble from the windows of his palace. The reports that reach him come in a dozen different languages, each meaningless to him. The governors who had once extended his authority to distant provinces now rule over populations that cannot understand their commands. The tribute that had flowed to Babel from across the known world stops arriving as administrative systems collapse. The king's attempts to maintain order through force prove futile. His guards, drawn from different tribes, cannot coordinate their actions. The military formations that had once enforced his will dissolve into confused clusters of armed men who cannot understand each other's signals. The power that had seemed absolute reveals itself as fragile as the words that had sustained it. The great library, where scholars had collected knowledge from across the world, becomes a monument to lost understanding. The texts that had once shared wisdom between cultures now speak only to those who wrote them. The universal scholarship that had flourished in Babel dies as the ability to share ideas across linguistic boundaries disappears. The engineering marvels that had made the city possible begin to fail. The aqueducts, maintained by teams who could no longer communicate, develop leaks that go unrepaired. The great roads, built through the cooperation of many peoples, crack and crumble as coordination becomes impossible. The infrastructure that had supported the growing population deteriorates as the knowledge needed to maintain it becomes trapped within linguistic barriers. The exodus begins slowly, then accelerates. The first families to leave are followed by entire clans, then whole tribes. The great city that had drawn people from across the world now drives them away. The magnetic pull that had created the largest human settlement in history reverses, scattering its population to the winds. As the population dwindles, the city's great markets close their doors. The workshops that had produced goods for trade across the known world fall silent. The schools where children had learned the universal language empty, as there is no longer a universal language to teach. The very institutions that had made Babel great become casualties of its linguistic fragmentation. The unity that had taken generations to build dissolves in a matter of weeks. The shared purpose that had driven the tower's construction evaporates as people lose the ability to express their common dreams. The great experiment in human cooperation ends not with conquest or disaster, but with the simple inability of people to understand each other's words. The city that had once embodied humanity's highest aspirations becomes a symbol of its deepest divisions. The tower that was meant to prevent scattering becomes the cause of the greatest scattering in human history. The monument to unity becomes a monument to the power of confusion to destroy even the strongest bonds between people. The fall of Nimrod. The mighty hunter who had once commanded the loyalty of nations now sits alone in his empty palace. The throne room that had witnessed the submission of countless tribal leaders echoes with silence. The golden ornaments that had proclaimed his authority gleam in the torchlight, but their meaning has become as hollow as the words that once proclaimed his glory. Nimrod's court, once filled with advisors from across the known world, has dissolved into linguistic chaos. The counselors who had once debated policy in the universal tongue now cluster in separate groups, each speaking in their own dialect. The king's commands, once obeyed without question, fall on uncomprehending ears. The very words that had once conveyed his authority now serve only to highlight his isolation. The tribute that had flowed to Babel from distant provinces stops arriving. The governors who had once extended Nimrod's power to far-off lands find themselves unable to communicate with their subjects. The administrative system that had bound the empire together collapses as the language that had facilitated its operation becomes meaningless noise. The wealth that had made Nimrod the greatest ruler in the world dissipates like morning mist. The king's attempts to maintain control through traditional means prove futile. The royal guard, once a disciplined force drawn from the empire's finest warriors, fragments along linguistic lines. The soldiers who had once moved as one body now struggle to understand each other's commands. The military might that had enforced Nimrod's rule crumbles as coordination becomes impossible. The great palace itself, once the center of a vast network of power, becomes a prison of isolation. The servants who had once attended to the king's every need now eye him with confusion and suspicion. The royal kitchens, staffed by cooks from many lands, produce meals that cannot be properly ordered. The very luxury that had symbolized Nimrod's success becomes a reminder of his fall. The king's family, drawn from royal marriages that had sealed alliances across the empire, finds itself divided by the linguistic barriers that have engulfed the city. The queen, who had once translated between different court factions, now speaks in a tongue that her husband cannot understand. The royal children, educated by tutors from various lands, find themselves unable to communicate with their own parents. The great construction projects that had proclaimed Nimrod's glory grind to a halt. The roads that had carried his name to distant lands crack and crumble from neglect. The irrigation systems that had turned desert into farmland fail as the knowledge needed to maintain them becomes trapped within linguistic barriers. The monuments that had been meant to proclaim his eternal rule become testaments to the fragility of human ambition. The trade networks that had made Babel wealthy collapse as merchants can no longer negotiate with suppliers or customers. The markets that had drawn goods from across the known world empty as commerce becomes impossible. The prosperity that had funded Nimrod's great works evaporates as the economic systems that had created it dissolve in linguistic confusion. The religious authority that had legitimized Nimrod's rule crumbles along with everything else. The priests who had once proclaimed him the god's chosen representative now speak in tongues that he cannot understand. The rituals that had sanctified his power become meaningless ceremonies performed by people who no longer share a common understanding of their purpose. The king's legendary prowess as a hunter, the foundation of his original fame, becomes irrelevant in a world where he cannot communicate with his hunting companions. The skills that had first marked him as special prove useless when he cannot coordinate with those who had once followed him into the wilderness. The very abilities that had elevated him above other men become sources of isolation. The great tower, Nimrod's ultimate monument to human achievement, stands incomplete and abandoned. The dream that had motivated its construction has died with the death of shared language. The symbol of unity has become a symbol of division. The monument to human ambition has become a monument to human failure. As the city empties around him, Nimrod finds himself ruling over a dwindling population of confused and frightened people. The empire that had once stretched to the horizons shrinks to the boundaries of the palace walls. The authority that had once extended across nations becomes confined to those few who still understand his words. The legend of Nimrod, the mighty hunter who had united the world, begins to transform into darker tales. The stories told around distant campfires speak of a king who had challenged heaven itself and suffered divine punishment. The name that had once inspired awe now serves as a warning about the dangers of excessive ambition. In the end, the man who had sought to prevent humanity's scattering becomes the cause of its greatest dispersal. The king who had dreamed of eternal unity presides over unprecedented division. The hunter who had once captured the loyalty of nations finds himself unable to hold even his own family together. The fall of Nimrod becomes not just the collapse of a ruler, but the end of humanity's first great experiment in unity. The lingering ruins. The great city of Babel, once home to countless thousands, now shelters only the wind and the memories of departed dreams. The streets that had bustled with merchants and craftsmen from across the known world lie empty, their paving stones cracked and overgrown with weeds. The houses that had sheltered families drawn from distant lands stand open to the sky, their roofs collapsed and their walls crumbling back into the earth from which they came. The marketplace, where goods from every corner of the world had changed hands, becomes a gathering place for wild animals. The stalls that had displayed silks and spices now host only dust and debris. The scales that had weighed precious metals rust in the abandoned shops. The very stones cry out with the silence of absent voices, their surfaces still bearing the marks of tools wielded by hands that have long since departed. The great tower dominates the landscape like a wounded giant. Its massive base, built from countless stones carried by willing hands, remains solid and imposing. The lower levels, completed in the days when unity still seemed possible, speak of incredible skill and determination. But the upper reaches, where the work had stopped so suddenly, present a different picture. Scaffolding hangs at dangerous angles, weathered by seasons of neglect. Tools lie scattered on the incomplete platforms, their metal surfaces stained with rust and age. Travelers who pass through the land of Shinar pause to stare at the abandoned monument. The tower's height still amazes those who see it, its peak reaching toward heaven like a finger pointing at the sky. But the silence that surrounds it speaks of failure rather than achievement. The great work that had consumed the lives and dreams of generations stands as a testament to the fragility of human ambition. The stories that travelers carry away from Babel grow more fantastic with each telling. Some speak of a tower that had actually reached heaven, only to be struck down by divine lightning. Others claim that the builders had uncovered forbidden knowledge that had driven them mad. Still others whisper that the tower had been cursed by ancient gods who had grown jealous of human achievement. The royal palace, once the center of a vast empire, becomes a roosting place for birds and bats. The throne room where Nimrod had received tribute from distant lands echoes with the sounds of creatures that know nothing of human authority. The golden ornaments that had proclaimed his power tarnish and fall from their mountings. The very symbols of majesty decay into meaningless debris. The great library, where scholars had collected wisdom from across the world, suffers perhaps the cruelest fate of all. The scrolls and tablets that had preserved knowledge through generations crumble into dust. The texts that had bridged cultures and languages become unintelligible marks on deteriorating surfaces. The accumulated learning of humanity's first great civilization dissolves back into the silence from which it had emerged. The temples, where priests had once led unified worship, become haunts for superstitious fears. The altars that had received offerings from believers across the empire now serve only as reminders of abandoned faith. The sacred fires that had burned continuously for generations have long since died out, leaving only cold ashes and empty braziers. The engineering marvels that had made the city possible fail one by one. The aqueducts that had brought water from distant mountains crack and collapse, their channels clogged with debris. The great roads that had connected Babel to the world beyond become overgrown paths that few dare to travel. The very infrastructure that had supported the greatest human settlement in history returns to the wilderness from which it had been carved. Seasons pass, and the ruins take on a life of their own. Vines climb the tower's sides, their green fingers seeking purchase in the mortar between stones. Trees take root in the abandoned courtyards, their branches reaching toward the light that filters through broken roofs. The city that had once defied nature now becomes nature's prize, reclaimed by the forces that humanity had thought to master. The name of Babel itself becomes a byword for failure and confusion. The city that had once represented the pinnacle of human achievement now serves as a warning about the dangers of excessive ambition. The very word carries echoes of the linguistic chaos that had brought down the greatest empire the world had ever known. Yet even in its ruin, the city retains a strange power over the human imagination. The tower, visible from great distances, draws curious travelers who come to see the monument to humanity's greatest failure. The ruins become a pilgrimage site of sorts, visited by those who seek to understand the limits of human ambition. The land of Shinar, once the most fertile and prosperous region in the world, begins to revert to its natural state. The farms that had fed the great city's population lie fallow, their irrigation channels filled with sand and debris. The cities that had grown up around Babel to serve its needs empty as their purpose disappears. The very landscape that had once proclaimed human dominance over nature begins to heal from the wounds that ambition had inflicted upon it. In the end, the ruins of Babel stand as a monument to both human achievement and human limitation. The stones that had been lifted toward heaven with such hope now rest in silence, their message clear to all who have eyes to see. The greatest construction project in human history has become the greatest reminder of the price of pride, its broken walls and abandoned towers speaking more eloquently than any words of the fragility of human dreams. The rise of languages. The confusion that began at Babel spreads across the world like ripples in a vast pond. The refugees who flee the ruined city carry with them more than just their possessions and memories. They carry the seeds of linguistic diversity that will reshape human civilization. The single tongue that had once united all humanity fragments into countless dialects, each group developing its own unique way of expressing the thoughts and dreams that define their identity. The northern tribes, who had come to Babel seeking prosperity, find themselves speaking in harsh, guttural sounds that echo the cold winds of their homeland. Their language develops words for snow and ice that have no equivalent in other tongues. The concepts that matter most to them, survival and endurance, become embedded in their speech patterns. Their children learn to think in terms that reflect their people's struggle against the elements. The southern clans, accustomed to the warmth of desert lands, develop a language rich in words for sand and sun. Their speech flows like water over stones, melodious and rhythmic. The poetry that emerges from their tongue speaks of vast spaces and endless horizons. Their merchants' vocabulary expands to include terms for trade goods that other peoples have never seen. The Eastern peoples, skilled in working with metals and stones, create a language that reflects their technical knowledge. Their words for different types of rock and ore become precise and detailed. The concepts that drive their craftsmanship find expression in terms that carry the weight of generations of accumulated wisdom. Their children learn to think with the precision that their ancestors brought to their work. The mountain folk, who had descended from high peaks to contribute their strength to the great construction, develop a language that echoes with the sound of falling stones and rushing water. Their speech carries the rhythm of picks striking rock and hammers shaping metal. The words they use to describe their homeland paint pictures of heights that touch the sky and depths that reach toward the earth's heart. The river people, who had navigated the great waterways to bring goods to Babel's markets, create a language that flows like the currents they had once mastered. Their words for different types of water become numerous and precise. The concepts that govern their understanding of navigation and trade find expression in terms that speak of journeys and destinations, of currents and tides. Each group that leaves Babel takes with them not just a new language, but a new way of understanding the world. The concepts that had once been universal become particular to each culture. The shared understanding that had made the great construction possible dissolves into countless different ways of interpreting reality. The very thoughts that people think begin to be shaped by the words they use to express them. The children born to these scattered groups grow up in a world very different from the one their parents had known. They learn languages that their grandparents could not have understood. The stories they hear around their campfires speak of a time when all people spoke the same tongue, but to them, such unity seems impossible. The linguistic diversity that surrounds them appears to be the natural state of humanity. The traders who had once conducted business across vast distances find their commercial networks transformed by linguistic barriers. The simple transactions that had once been completed with a few words now require complex negotiations involving gestures and symbols. The art of trade evolves to include new skills as merchants learn to communicate across language barriers through methods that transcend words. The priests who had once led unified worship find themselves developing separate religious traditions. The prayers that had once been universal become particular to each group. The gods themselves seem to speak in different voices to different peoples. The sacred texts that had once been shared across cultures become incomprehensible to those who do not speak the language in which they were written. The scholars who had once shared knowledge freely across cultural boundaries find themselves isolated by linguistic barriers. The wisdom that had once been universal becomes trapped within the boundaries of particular languages. The great conversations that had once spanned continents become impossible as the words needed to express complex ideas become unintelligible to those who most need to hear them. The families that had been united by the great project find themselves divided by the languages their children speak. The grandparents who had worked together on the tower cannot communicate with grandchildren who have learned different tongues. The bonds that had once held communities together weaken as the ability to share thoughts and feelings becomes limited to those who speak the same language. The songs that had once united workers from across the world become the exclusive property of particular groups. The melodies that had once accompanied shared labor now carry words that only some can understand. The music that had once expressed universal human emotions becomes filtered through the particular perspectives of individual cultures. As the years pass, the languages that emerged from Babel's confusion continue to evolve and change. The groups that had once been united by a common tongue develop not just different words, but different ways of thinking about the world. The concepts that had once been shared across all humanity become the particular possessions of individual cultures. The diversity that emerges from this linguistic fragmentation brings both loss and gain. The unity that had once made great projects possible disappears, but the richness of human expression expands beyond anything that had been possible when all people spoke the same tongue. The confusion that had destroyed Babel becomes the foundation for a new kind of human civilization, one defined not by unity, but by the beautiful complexity of countless different ways of understanding and expressing the human experience. Babel's echoes in ancient memory. The story of Babel's fall spreads across the ancient world like seeds carried on the wind. Each culture that receives the tale shapes it according to their own understanding, their own fears, their own hopes. The memory of the great tower and its sudden abandonment becomes woven into the fabric of human storytelling, taking on new forms as it passes from one generation to the next. In the great cities of Sumer, where skilled workers had once traveled to contribute their expertise to Babel's construction, the story takes on the character of a divine judgment. The scribes who record the tale on clay tablets speak of gods who had grown jealous of human achievement. Their version emphasizes the tower's incredible height, claiming that it had actually reached the dwelling place of the gods themselves. The punishment they describe matches the crime, as the gods scatter humanity to prevent any future challenge to their authority. The storytellers of Akkad, inheritors of Nimrod's legacy, preserve tales that focus on the great king's ambition and downfall. Their version presents Babel as the ultimate expression of royal power, a monument to the idea that human rulers could challenge heaven itself. The linguistic confusion that destroyed the project becomes, in their telling, a divine response to excessive pride. The lesson they draw warns future kings about the dangers of reaching too far beyond mortal limitations. The mountain peoples, who had descended from their high peaks to work on the great construction, carry home stories that emphasize the tower's incredible height. Their tales describe a structure that had grown so tall it had cast shadows across entire kingdoms. The workers, in their version, had actually climbed into the realm of the clouds, where they had encountered divine beings who had not welcomed their presence. The confusion of languages becomes, in their telling, a protective measure taken by the gods to prevent humanity from trespassing again in heavenly realms. The river peoples, who had navigated great waterways to bring materials to Babel, preserve versions of the story that emphasize the project's scale and complexity. Their tales speak of supply chains that had stretched across the known world, of boats that had carried stones from distant quarries, of the incredible logistics required to feed and house the vast workforce. The linguistic confusion that ended the project becomes, in their version, a divine recognition that humanity had learned to cooperate too well, threatening the natural order that kept mortals in their proper place. The desert dwellers, who had once traded with Babel's merchants, tell stories that focus on the city's wealth and diversity. Their version emphasizes the incredible prosperity that had drawn people from across the world to participate in the great work. The tower itself becomes secondary to the city that had supported it, a place where goods and ideas from every culture had mingled freely. The confusion of languages becomes, in their telling, a divine intervention to prevent the concentration of too much power in a single place. The forest peoples, who had provided timber for Babel's construction, preserved tales that emphasize the relationship between human ambition and natural forces. Their stories describe how the tower had required the destruction of entire forests, how the demand for wood had stripped the land bare for miles around the construction site. The linguistic confusion becomes, in their version, nature's response to human excess, a restoration of balance after humanity had taken too much from the world. The crafters and artisans who had contributed their skills to the great work carry home stories that focus on the incredible techniques and innovations that had made the construction possible. Their tales preserve detailed descriptions of the tools and methods that had been developed specifically for the project. The confusion of languages becomes, in their version, a tragic loss of knowledge and skill, a divine punishment that had prevented humanity from achieving even greater wonders. The merchants who had grown wealthy through trade with Babel preserve stories that emphasize the economic networks that had made the project possible. Their tales describe the flow of goods and materials that had sustained the great work, the complex systems of exchange that had developed to support the massive workforce. The linguistic confusion becomes, in their version, a divine intervention to prevent the creation of an economic system that would have dominated the entire world. The priests who had served in Babel's temples carry home stories that focus on the religious significance of the great work. Their tales describe the tower as an attempt to create a bridge between earth and heaven, a physical manifestation of humanity's desire to commune with the divine. The confusion of languages becomes, in their version, a divine response to theological presumption, a reminder that the gap between mortal and divine cannot be bridged by human effort alone. As these various versions of the Babel story spread and intermingle, they create a rich tapestry of human memory. The historical reality of the Great Construction Project becomes enhanced by mythological elements that speak to deeper human concerns about ambition, unity, and the proper relationship between humanity and the divine. The story evolves from a simple account of a construction failure into a complex meditation on human nature itself. The great ziggurats that later civilizations build across Mesopotamia become, in part, responses to the memory of Babel. These stepped pyramids, reaching toward heaven but stopping short of the heights that had brought divine punishment, represent humanity's continuing desire to reach upward, while acknowledging the limits that had been imposed upon such ambitions. The architectural traditions that develop in the region carry echoes of both the dream and the failure that had defined humanity's first great construction project. The oral traditions that preserve these stories become the foundation for written literature that will influence human thought for millennia. The tale of Babel, in all its variations, becomes a touchstone for discussions about human ambition, divine authority, and the proper relationship between individual achievement and collective responsibility. The memory of the Great Tower and its abandonment becomes woven into the very fabric of human civilization, a reminder of both the heights humanity can reach and the forces that can bring down even the greatest achievements. Babel's place in biblical history. The story of Babel emerges from the mists of ancient memory to take its place in the sacred narratives that will shape human understanding for millennia. The tale of the Great Tower and its abandonment becomes more than just a historical account. It transforms into a theological statement about the relationship between human ambition and divine authority, a bridge between the universal history of early humanity and the particular story of God's chosen people. The biblical narrative presents Babel as the culmination of humanity's first great experiment with unity. The story serves as a counterpoint to the account of Noah's flood, showing how the world that had been cleansed by water could still be corrupted by pride. The tower becomes a symbol of humanity's refusal to accept its proper place in the cosmic order, an attempt to storm heaven itself through collective effort and technological achievement. The linguistic confusion that destroys the project carries profound theological significance. The diversity of languages that emerges from Babel's ruins becomes both a punishment and a protection. It prevents humanity from achieving the kind of unified rebellion that had motivated the tower's construction, debt. But it also ensures that human culture will develop along multiple pathways rather than becoming locked into a single form. The confusion becomes a divine gift wrapped in the appearance of judgment. The story of Babel sets the stage for the calling of Abraham, who emerges from the same region where the great tower had once reached toward heaven. The man who will become the father of faith comes from the very land where humanity had last attempted to achieve greatness through its own efforts. The contrast between Babel's collective pride and Abraham's individual faith becomes a central theme in the unfolding biblical narrative. The genealogies that connect Noah's descendants to the builders of Babel provide a framework for understanding how human diversity emerged from human unity. The table of nations that biblical writers preserve shows how the confusion of languages led to the development of distinct peoples, each with their own territories and customs. The scattering that had begun at Babel becomes the foundation for the ethnic and cultural diversity that characterizes the human story. The theological interpretation of Babel's fall emphasizes the danger of human pride and the importance of recognizing divine authority. The tower builders' declaration that they will make a name for themselves becomes a perfect example of the kind of pride that goes before destruction. Their fear of being scattered across the earth reveals a desire to control their own destiny that conflicts with God's plan for human development. The Hebrew writers who preserve the Babel story understand it as a demonstration of divine sovereignty over human affairs. The God who descends to see what humanity has built shows both interest in human activities and ultimate authority over them. The decision to confuse their language demonstrates that no human achievement, however impressive, can succeed without divine blessing. The story becomes a reminder that human greatness depends not on collective effort, but on proper relationship with the divine. The prophetic tradition that emerges from Hebrew scripture frequently refers back to Babel as a warning about the dangers of human pride. The tower becomes a symbol of any human institution that attempts to establish itself without reference to divine authority. The linguistic confusion that destroyed the project becomes a template for understanding how God can frustrate human plans that conflict with divine purposes. The wisdom literature that develops within Hebrew culture draws lessons from Babel about the proper relationship between human ambition and divine will. The story illustrates the principle that human plans cannot succeed without divine approval, no matter how impressive the resources or determination behind them. The collapse of the Great Construction Project becomes a paradigm for understanding how pride leads to downfall. The apocalyptic writings that emerge from Hebrew tradition often invoke Babel as a type of worldly power that will ultimately be judged and found wanting. The great city that had once dominated the world becomes a symbol of all human institutions that exalt themselves above their proper place. The confusion and scattering that had destroyed the original Babel becomes a pattern for understanding how divine judgment will affect all similar attempts at human self glorification. The story of Babel also provides a theological framework for understanding the necessity of God's special revelation to humanity. The confusion of languages that had made direct communication impossible between different peoples creates a need for divine intervention to restore understanding. The particular calling of Abraham and his descendants becomes part of God's plan to address the fragmentation that had begun at Babel. The covenant that God establishes with Abraham's family serves as a response to the problems that Babel had created. Where the tower builders had sought to prevent their scattering, God promises to make Abraham's descendants a blessing to all nations. Where Babel had attempted to achieve unity through human effort, God offers to create unity through divine grace. The particular becomes the pathway to the universal. The sacrificial system that develops within Hebrew religion provides a mechanism for dealing with the kind of pride that had motivated Babel's construction. The regular acknowledgement of human dependence on divine mercy becomes a guard against the sort of self-sufficiency that had led to the tower's building. The rituals that emphasize human limitation serve as antidotes to the hubris that had brought down the great construction project. The messianic hope that emerges from Hebrew scripture can be understood as God's ultimate response to the problems that Babel had created. The promise of a coming deliverer who will restore unity among the nations addresses the fragmentation that had resulted from the linguistic confusion. The vision of a restored humanity, united not by a common language but by a common faith, provides the ultimate answer to Babel's failure. The story of Babel becomes woven into the fabric of biblical theology as a foundational narrative about human nature and divine response. The tower stands as a monument to human ambition, while its abandonment demonstrates the limits of human achievement. The confusion of languages becomes both a judgment on human pride and a protection against future attempts at collective rebellion. Babel in modern interpretation. The ancient story of Babel awakens in each new generation, finding fresh meaning in the struggles and dreams of contemporary humanity. The tale of the Great Tower and its abandonment speaks to modern concerns about globalization, technology, and the tension between unity and diversity. The linguistic confusion that had destroyed the original project becomes a metaphor for the communication failures that plague modern societies. Political theorists discover in Babel a warning about the dangers of centralized power and the importance of maintaining diversity in human institutions. The story of Nimrod's empire and its collapse becomes a cautionary tale about the fragility of political unity when it depends on the suppression of natural human differences. The scattering that had followed the tower's abandonment becomes a model for understanding how healthy societies require multiple centers of power and authority. Economic analysts find in Babel's story parallels to the rise and fall of great commercial empires. The city's prosperity, built on trade networks that had spanned the known world, mirrors the global economy that connects modern nations. The collapse of these systems, following the linguistic confusion, becomes a metaphor for how communication failures can destroy even the most robust economic relationships. Linguists and anthropologists study the Babel narrative as a mythological explanation for the diversity of human languages and cultures. The story provides a framework for understanding how the rich variety of human expression might have emerged from an original unity. The confusion that had destroyed the tower becomes a creative force that had generated the cultural diversity that characterizes human civilization. Artists and writers find in Babel an inexhaustible source of inspiration for exploring themes of ambition, failure, and the relationship between human achievement and divine judgment. The image of the unfinished tower reaching toward heaven becomes a powerful symbol for any human endeavor that attempts to transcend natural limitations. The story's dramatic arc, from unified purpose to chaotic collapse, provides a template for narratives about the rise and fall of human institutions. Religious communities interpret the Babel story through the lens of their own theological traditions. finding in it lessons about pride, humility, and the proper relationship between human ambition and divine will. The tower becomes a symbol of any human institution that attempts to establish itself without reference to higher authority. The linguistic confusion becomes a divine intervention that preserves human freedom by preventing the concentration of too much power in any single institution. Psychologists discover in Babel a deep human story about the tension between individual identity and collective belonging. The story explores how the desire for unity can conflict with the need for diversity, how the drive toward conformity can suppress the individual differences that make human society dynamic and creative. The confusion of languages becomes a metaphor for the psychological barriers that prevent perfect communication between individuals. Sociologists find in Babel's narrative insights into the processes by which human communities form and dissolve. The story illustrates how shared language and common purpose can create powerful bonds between people, while also showing how the loss of these shared elements can lead to fragmentation and conflict. The scattering that followed the tower's abandonment becomes a model for understanding how social cohesion depends on continued communication and mutual understanding. Technology theorists see in Babel's story a warning about the unintended consequences of human innovation. The Great Construction Project represents humanity's first attempt to use technology to transcend natural limitations. The project's failure suggests that technological progress without corresponding moral development can lead to disaster. The confusion that destroyed the tower becomes a metaphor for how complex technologies can become incomprehensible even to their creators. Environmental thinkers interpret Babel as a story about the relationship between human ambition and natural limits. The tower's construction had required the consumption of enormous resources and the transformation of the natural landscape. The project's failure suggests that human prosperity depends on maintaining balance with the natural world. The abandonment of the construction site becomes a symbol of how nature reclaims spaces that humanity cannot sustain. Educational theorists find in Babel lessons about the importance of maintaining diversity in human learning and thinking. The story suggests that the concentration of all knowledge and skill in a single place can lead to intellectual stagnation and ultimate failure. The scattering that followed the tower's collapse becomes a model for understanding how the distribution of learning across multiple communities can preserve and develop human knowledge more effectively than centralized systems. Urban planners study Babel's story as a cautionary tale about the challenges of creating sustainable human settlements. The great city's rise and fall illustrates how rapid growth can outpace the development of the social and cultural institutions needed to support it. The abandonment of the city becomes a warning about the importance of building communities that can adapt to changing circumstances. International relations experts find in Babel insights into the dynamics of cooperation and conflict between different nations and cultures. The story shows how shared projects can bring diverse peoples together, while also revealing how communication failures can destroy even the strongest alliances. The linguistic confusion becomes a metaphor for the misunderstandings that can arise when different cultures attempt to work together without developing adequate mechanisms for mutual comprehension. The story of Babel continues to resonate because it addresses fundamental questions about human nature and human destiny. The tower builder's dream of unity speaks to the deep human desire to overcome the barriers that separate people from one another. Their failure reminds us that such unity cannot be achieved through human effort alone, but requires the kind of understanding that transcends mere technical cooperation. The legacy of Babel. The shadow of the great tower stretches across human history, its incomplete peak a permanent reminder of both the heights humanity can reach and the forces that can bring down even the greatest achievements. The story that began with unified purpose and ended in confusion has become woven into the very fabric of human consciousness, shaping how we understand ourselves and our place in the cosmos. The linguistic diversity that emerged from Babel's ruins has become one of humanity's greatest treasures. The thousands of languages that descended from the original confusion carry within them unique ways of understanding the world, distinct approaches to expressing the deepest human experiences. The gift wrapped in apparent judgment has enriched human culture beyond measure, creating a tapestry of expression that no single tongue could have achieved. The architectural legacy of Babel lives on in every ambitious construction project that reaches toward the sky. The great cathedrals of medieval Europe, the soaring skyscrapers of modern cities, the space vehicles that carry human dreams beyond Earth's atmosphere all carry echoes of the original tower's ambition. Each represents humanity's continuing desire to transcend natural limitations, to build monuments that will proclaim human achievement for generations to come. The political lessons of Babel continue to influence how human societies organize themselves. The story of Nimrod's empire and its collapse serves as a warning about the dangers of concentrating too much power in any single institution. The fragmentation that followed the tower's abandonment becomes a model for understanding why healthy societies require multiple centers of authority and diverse sources of legitimacy. The economic principles that emerged from Babel's story continue to shape how human communities think about prosperity and development. The city's wealth, built on trade networks that spanned the known world, prefigures the global economy that connects modern nations. The collapse of these systems following the linguistic confusion provides insights into how communication failures can destroy even the most robust commercial relationships. The religious and philosophical traditions that preserve Babel's story have found in it a rich source of insight into the human condition. The tower becomes a symbol of any human endeavor that attempts to achieve transcendence through purely material means. The confusion that destroyed the project becomes a reminder that human greatness depends not on technical achievement, but on proper relationship with the forces that govern the universe. The artistic and literary traditions that have drawn inspiration from Babel's story have created works that continue to move and challenge audiences across cultures and centuries. The image of the unfinished tower has become one of the most powerful symbols in human art, representing the gap between human ambition and human achievement. The story's dramatic arc provides a template for narratives about the rise and fall of human institutions. The scientific and technological progress that has characterized human development since Babel's time can be understood as both a fulfillment and a continuation of the tower builder's dream. The achievements that would have amazed the original architects pale beside the wonders that modern technology has made possible. Yet the same pride that had motivated the original instruction continues to drive human innovation, creating both extraordinary achievements and unprecedented dangers. The educational systems that transmit human image from one generation to the next, carry forward the lessons that Babel's story teaches. The importance of maintaining diversity in human learning, the dangers of concentrating all knowledge in single institutions, the need for humility in the face of ultimate mysteries, all find expression in how human societies organize their approaches to education and research. The urban planning principles that guide the development of modern cities reflect lessons learned from Babel's rise and fall. The importance of creating sustainable communities, the need to balance growth with social cohesion, the challenge of maintaining cultural diversity within unified political structures all echo themes that emerged from the original story. The international relations that govern interactions between modern nations carry forward both the promise and the peril that Babel's story represents. The dream of human unity that had motivated the original construction continues to inspire efforts at international cooperation. The communication failures that had destroyed the project serve as warnings about the challenges that face any attempt to create lasting peace between diverse peoples. The environmental challenges that confront modern civilization echo the themes that run through Babel's story. The tower's construction had required the consumption of enormous resources and the transformation of the natural landscape. The project's abandonment suggests that human prosperity depends on maintaining balance with the natural world. The ruins that nature had reclaimed serve as a reminder that all human achievements remain subject to forces beyond human control. The psychological insights that emerge from Babel's story continue to influence how individuals understand their own lives and relationships. The tension between the desire for unity and the need for individual identity the conflict between collective belonging and personal freedom, the challenge of maintaining authentic communication in complex societies all find expression in the ancient narrative. The technological innovations that have transformed human life since ancient times represent both the fulfillment and the continuation of the ambitions that had driven Babel's construction. The builder's dream of creating structures that would reach toward heaven has been realized through achievements they could never have imagined. Yet the same pride that had motivated their work continues to drive human innovation, creating both extraordinary opportunities and unprecedented risks. The story of Babel reminds us that human greatness emerges not from the absence of limitations, but from how we respond to the boundaries that define our existence. The tower builder's failure teaches us that true unity cannot be achieved through domination or control, but must emerge from respect for the diversity that makes human community both challenging and rewarding. In the end, the legacy of Babel lives on in every human community that seeks to balance unity with diversity, ambition with humility, achievement with wisdom. The great tower may have been abandoned, but its dream continues to inspire and challenge humanity. The confusion that destroyed the original project has become the foundation for a richer, more complex human story, one that honors both our highest aspirations and our deepest limitations. The fractured languages that emerged from Babel's ruins carry within them the seeds of future understanding. The scattering that began in the shadow of the unfinished tower continues to generate new possibilities for human connection and creativity. The story that began with a single dream of reaching heaven has become countless stories, each told in its own tongue, each adding its voice to the great human conversation about who we are and who we might become.